So my brothers and my sisters, as we embrace this urgency of creating the beloved community, now is the time to be loved. Love means understanding, redemptive goodwill toward all, which seeks nothing in return. So be loved by implementing the demands of justice to eliminate the school to prison pipeline that has so many black children entrapped. Be loved by correcting voting policies that seek to suppress the votes of millions of black and brown people. Be loved and implement the demands of justice by transforming a society that is disproportionately violent toward black lives, including black transgendered lives and indigenous lives. Be loved and correct false narratives and economic policies that continue to divide and pit poor and working class black and white people against each other. Be loved and implement demands of justice where systems and structures are deconstructed and lead the way of living in community that reimagines just, humane, equitable, and sustainable policies, practices, and behaviors. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them who hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and abuse you. Be loved and do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with our God.
Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression. Man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. changed the world when he demonstrated what could be achieved through nonviolence. Now, you can learn how to live and practice this philosophy yourself through NonViolence 365 Online, an innovative digital experience developed by the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. NonViolence 365 Online features extensive video interviews with real nonviolence practitioners, including the King Center CEO Dr. Bernice A. King, King Center certified instructors and trainers, and veterans of the civil rights movement. Explorations of the historic campaigns that helped Dr. King forge his philosophy. Immersive, annotated reading experiences that enhance Dr. King's most influential writings on nonviolence. Custom activities, including quizzes and interactive scenarios to help you practice along the way. Real-world exercises to help you start applying nonviolence in your daily life. NonViolence 365 is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, engaging, and acting that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. It isn't just a concept for philosophers or political leaders. NonViolence 365 is a powerful, practical approach to navigating conflict and injustice. Whether it's in your personal life, in your school or workplace, your local community, or a national movement. Dr. King, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and many others sought to create the beloved community, a society built on global cooperation and equity. This wasn't a lofty utopian dream. It's a realistic and achievable goal, because each and every one of us has the power to make it happen by committing to nonviolence as a way of life. Take the first step today with NonViolence 365 Online.
The King Center's beloved Community Leadership Academy is excited about the opportunity to help students recognize and develop their potential to become nonviolent leaders in industries such as technology, innovation, business, and entrepreneurship. Students will have the opportunity to engage in networking opportunities with business professionals and representatives from the King Center, universities, Fortune 500 companies, and civic leaders who will empower today's youth with the skills to effectively implement Dr. King's philosophy and methodology of nonviolence The beloved Community Leadership Academy is committed to developing the next generation of compassionate, courageous, and conscientious nonviolent leaders to solve pressing world issues. For more information and to apply, please visit www.thekingcenter.org/Leadership Academy.
Good evening. My name is Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis. I'm the director of the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice, and I'm also the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, A National Call for Moral Revival. It's truly an honor to be with you all this evening and to be a part of this exciting and inspiring conversation. During the past two beloved community talks, the King Center has begun exploring what Dr. King called the triple evils, starting with militarism, taking on then racism, and tonight focusing on the issue of poverty. Reverend Dr. King said over 50 years ago, there is nothing new about poverty. What is new, however, is to get rid of it. Now, those words are perhaps even truer today, more than 50 years ago, as we see advances of technology, even currency that gives us a greater opportunity to eradicate poverty in this, the richest country in the world. In 1967, Dr. King, along with welfare rights leaders and families in Appalachia and Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers and others, helped to launch the Poor People's Campaign to address the issues of unemployment and housing shortages, hunger, the impact of poverty on millions in America. Now, 55 years later, I'm still in the fight to eradicate poverty as the current co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. And we, in the Poor People's Campaign, A National Call for Moral Revival, are uniting and organizing the 140 million people who are poor and low income in this, the richest country in human history. We're coming forward to confront interlocking injustices, just like Dr. King talked about, of racism, of poverty, of ecological devastation and the denial of healthcare, of militarism and the war economy, and of this distorted, this false moral narrative of religious nationalism. Now, yes, I said there are 140 million people who are poor and low income in this country. That's 43% of the population. That's 52% of our kids. And so we in the Poor People's Campaign are trying to build a moral movement, calling for a revival of the very soul of our democracy and our nation. Now, the Poor People's Campaign, A National Call for Moral Revival, we launched in 2018 on the 50th anniversary of the 1968 campaign with the largest and most expansive wave of nonviolent civil disobedience in the 21st century. We are today organized in more than 40 states all across the country. And I encourage folks that are tuning in this evening to get involved with the programs that we'll talk about more tonight, as well as in the Poor People's Campaign. And this June 18th, we're organizing the largest gathering of poor and low-income people in U.S. history when we gather on Pennsylvania Avenue for a mass poor people and low-wage workers assembly and a moral march on Washington and to the polls. Now, we have an anthem of our movement, a saying in our movement, and that's that somebody's been hurting our people. It's gone on for far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. We are indeed breaking the silence on injustice, on poverty, on inequality. We are saying to this nation and to this world that any nation that throws away more food than it takes to feed everyone is immoral and wrong, and we have the power to change it. There's no scarcity of resources in this country or in this world. But as we see, there is a scarcity of moral and political will and moral consciousness to get it done. And so that's why, indeed, I'm so excited to be here in the numbers this evening with folks for a very important conversation. I am getting ready to introduce some of the greatest champions fighting poverty, seeking to create greater economic equity. And so I want to welcome and introduce the first guest this evening, Michael Tubbs. Now, my first guest tonight made history in 2016 when he was elected the youngest and the first Black mayor of Stockton at only the age of 26. Michael Tubbs is currently the founder of EPIC, and he's also the founder of Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. He's a special advisor to the California Governor Gavin Newsom for economic mobility. And so I want to welcome Michael Tubbs to this beloved community talk. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, for your work, your leadership. And I think I really appreciate the rousing reminder that this is such an evil choice we're making in terms of having so much poverty in our country and world.
That's right. That's right. It's completely a choice. And so I want to dive right in and talk to you about, one of the many initiatives that you have started when mayor, especially around this question, this issue of guaranteed income, because I think it actually gets to the very heart of what Dr. King was talking about when he says that we have the resources to get rid of poverty. I'm not sure everyone that's joining us is as familiar as they should be about this initiative. And so I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit more information about that program that you started and where it all stands today.
Yeah, well, much like the inspiration behind the Poor People's Campaign, I learned about guaranteed income from studying Dr. King. I was a freshman in college, and we read Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos Our Community. And he talks about how we try to solve for poverty by solving for everything else. He said, we try to solve for poverty by solving for housing. We try to solve for poverty by solving for healthcare. We try to solve for poverty by solving for education. And he said, all these efforts are piecemeal and stigma at best. And then he said, I am now convinced after doing all these speeches and marches and deep thinking and strategizing that the best way to abolish poverty is the simplest and the most direct, a guaranteed income. And I remember reading that and being troubled because as someone who grew up in church, every Dr. King's Day, I was doing a Dr. King speech or we're doing some sort of play, but had never talked about this part of his legacy. So fast forward, when I was mayor of Stockton, poverty was the issue. Like people were having conversations about educational attainment or about violence or about housing insecurity. But the root of everything was poverty as an heirloom, the pervasive nature of poverty in the city and how it was passed down from generations to generations, where we have entire neighborhoods that have been high poverty neighborhoods since the freeway was built and since redlining for 40 to 50 years. Now, I told my staff, look, y'all, well, I thought I was going to get 2 terms, but it's a different story. I said, listen, we have to do something with the time we have, though, that means something. So let's figure out what we can do around poverty. Long story short, partner with the Economic Security Project. And in 2017, we announced we're going to give $500 a month to people with no strings attached. And Reverend Doctor, you would have thought I said I was going to give everyone assault rifles. The way in which people were so upset and angry, we would get people cussing me out on voice, but like upset and angry. Longer story short, we did that for 2 years. And what we found is that all these myths that you all fight against in the campaign, in which the King Center fights against, these violent myths about people who have less money, are not true. That people spent the money the way you and I spend money because they're people. Those who received the guaranteed income were 2 times more likely to go from part-time work to full-time work than those who didn't. Those who received the guaranteed income were 2 times less likely to be unemployed than those who didn't. And that folks knew how to spend money. And from that success, we launched Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. And now we have 80 mayors across this country, 40 of whom are running their own guaranteed income pilots in the spirit of Dr. King. We saw the child tax credit. We saw some sort of stimulus checks. I think what's been most hopeful in a very kind of dark moment in many respects politically, what's giving me hope in terms of the fight against poverty is that the question has gone from can we give people money to who do we give money to and how much and how long? And that's a better place to be in than we were before.
No, thank you so much for that. I mean, I think it is really important for us to talk about the fact that there are these solutions. They're proven, they're effective, right? and they're very popular, right? I mean, you might have looked at people might have looked at you like you were, talking about something from outer space. But then with that data you're talking about, I mean, you can see how much it lifts the load of poverty and therefore makes life, better and for everybody, not just those that are benefiting from it.
And I'll shut up after this, but I think what was telling for me was you had President Trump delaying checks going out because he wanted to make sure his signature was on them. He wanted people to know that, no, that's me giving you money. You had everyone who was upset, but I have not met one person who turned back their checks.
No.
I've not met a single person that was burning the checks. Like, we don't want this money. We're now become socialists. Like, every single body from California to Tennessee, everyone who received that check was happy because it was necessary, particularly the parents with the child tax credit.
That's right. That's right. And it lifted 4 million children above the poverty line. And then our politicians have failed to extend it and therefore sent those 4 million children right back to the other side. And so I think the kind of next question I want to talk to you about is what we've seen over the past 3 years almost of this pandemic, where I think there has been more of a spotlight on the disparities that poverty creates, whether that's access to food or shelter or healthcare, or education, the fact that we have workers who are now called essential but can't afford the essentials of life, right? And many of those same things that were actually the very kind of impetus for Dr. King and others to launch a Poor People's Campaign and to amplify and address these issues. And so I think I would love to hear from you, more about your experience and also your vision 55 years later of what do you believe is a pathway to eradicating poverty and to more economic mobility.
COVID-19 was terrible. But it was more terrible because of the pre-existing condition of poverty.
Oh, that's right.
That if you looked at the folks who are most likely to be infected, these were folks who are in poverty industries, folks who couldn't afford sort of housing, so they were sheltering with many, many people, young people who couldn't do work virtually because there's 20 people living in their house. And I think it was through no fault of their own, people couldn't even go to work. And those same people didn't have paid time off, didn't have family leave, didn't have sick days. And I think it made everyone really for a moment think about, wow, we are so unprepared. And for me, I truly believe we live in a time of pandemics. It's not an if, but when they happen.
That's right.
And economic resilience and the lack of economic resilience and the pervasive poverty makes us all incredibly unsafe for the next pathogen, the next wildfire, the next earthquake. So really, I think COVID-19 really at least focused other electeds to think about. We have to shore up it's like the biblical story about the foundation built on rock or sand. And it really illustrates to us that our foundation is built on sand. There's this hyper-capitalist economy where a few extract a lot from the many, and many are left with nothing, like not even like shelter, enough for food, etc. And I think in terms of eradicating poverty, because there's lots, as you guys do such great work on this, you all in the King Center, but we know that poverty primarily is about lack of cash, but we also know because of our society that lack of cash does something to the spirit. Can do something to the esteem, can do something for one's vision of themselves. So I think the first thing we have to do is just eliminate the poverty that's physical with a guaranteed income, an income floor. Just if someone can make $100 billion, no one should have $0. That's just simple math to me. Number one, we could do that with a guaranteed income, with an income floor. And then number two, we have to do the work of repairing the harms that have been done by the violence of poverty on people's spirits and psyches and aspirations and the way we relate to one another. And then lastly, I'll also say, I just believe in abundance. So I don't think it's enough for people just to have enough for rent, enough, like that's better than we are now, but we also have to give people the opportunity to build wealth. So we have to look at things like baby bonds. So that children born graduate when they're 18 with a nest egg with something. We have to look at things like reparations, like how to repay back for not just slavery, but for redlining, for the denial of GI Bill benefits, for like all these systematic things that have caused some people to have less and others to have more. And it sounds ambitious, but let's just start with the simple. The child tax. If we just had a child tax credit permanently, I would be good. Honestly, I'm like, well, someone else can help everyone else out. We got all these parents with kids out of poverty. That's a job well done, and that's what motivates me, and I think this probably motivates you. Is this idea that the solutions are tangible, not just theoretical. We've done them. We are doing them.
Yeah.
People are doing them as we speak right now. People are receiving monthly checks. You're going to hear from my good friend Hope in a little bit about sort of what she's doing for Black women or with Black women in Georgia. Like, these ideas aren't just in King's writings and in King's words. They're literally being implemented today in this country. And COVID-19, if nothing else, was a warning. Like, listen, we got to get our house in order. And part of that means everyone should have a floor, because the bottom will fall out. And we at least have folks have a foundation, because we can actually afford it. And then and the last thing I'll say is what makes me so animated by this policy discussion is that we already spend so much money on poverty. We are already, like, it's not a new expenditure. We're spending so much money in poverty because we incarcerate poverty, because we police poverty, because we encampment suite poverty, because we remedial school poverty. Like, we spend all this money on the thing we don't want to solve for, which is poverty. And that's why, and I'll shut up after this, I promise, but that's why in California, we're starting this End Poverty in California campaign, because it's like, okay, the nation's big, but California is the 5th largest economy. California has political alignment. Everyone says they're forward thinking and progressive, and we have the highest poverty rate in the country. So let's do something about that. And that's sort of another play we're making, is building off the success of guaranteed income. Let's just have a conversation. Why do we allow so much poverty? Who is pro-poverty? Like who is the pro-poverty lobby, and how do we organize against them so that our folks can be economically free?
No, I really appreciate all of that. I mean, I think about, a couple of the statistics that we have found to be true, where our nation spends $1 trillion every year on child poverty, on kids being poor, right? I mean, if we actually were to spend that money instead to have a guaranteed income, to
oh my gosh, I'm like tearing up. I didn't know we spent them. I'm about to cry.
The cost of poverty is tremendous.
Oh my gosh.
The money that we don't pay, workers. If folks were to actually get a living wage, that would help the whole economy. The money that we spend on all of these different things. In fact, we can't afford to not address these issues. And yet this is so much the reality. And I think, you said a lot of things right there that I really would love to keep on drawing from. This kind of history of end poverty in California legacy that you're coming from. But I think also with you posing this question of, well, who is it that is against actually addressing and eradicating poverty? I'm wondering, have there been some stigmas around poverty that you have faced, or have there been some obstacles and lies that are put out there? And is there lessons that we could learn from some of that work? Some of the pushback, maybe.
Yeah, and the lies are so stark for me because I grew up in poverty. I grew up with 3 single Black women. My mom had me at 16. I was on government assistance for the first 5 years of my life. So I remember going to college at Stanford and hearing people talk about people that were poor, and it looked like nothing like the people I knew. I was like flabbergasted. Yeah. They would say things like, people want to be poor. Being poor is not fun. I never want to be poor again. No, and I don't also want anyone to be poor. The lies like, if people would work hard, they wouldn't be poor. When the hardest working people in this country are always paid the least, or paid nothing at all, like caregivers, stay-at-home mothers, etc. they would say things like, it was God ordained, that God decided that these folks would. That was one thing to hear in college, but then I got into the policy world. I was a city council person and the mayor, and the same pervasive arguments. We don't need to do anything for these people. They don't care. Some people are just going to be poor. Yeah. People are poor because they're lazy. They don't need. They get handouts. They're reliant. They don't work hard, and that's where the passion comes from, because they're just literally lies. Like literally, the truth is the opposite.
That's right.
That folks working 2-3 jobs who are poor, folks who doing, and you said it in the intro, folks who are doing the work around that we call essential. It's so essential, but you can't pay it. And then when we're doing guaranteed income, that became more and more pervasive, because even after the data was out, an evaluation not done by me, but by PhDs who I did not know, who evaluated the program, independent of me, I still contend with the same stuff. Lies and myths, really clothed in racism and sexism and greed. And that's why I keep telling, we say now that so much of this work is also narrative work and changing the conversation. And I think you wrote an op-ed that talked about how poverty is the sin, not the person in poverty. Like it's not even hate the sin, love this, hate the sin, love the sinners. Like there's no sinners. Like the poverty folks aren't sinning. The fact that we have so much poverty is a sin. I think that's the work we have to do. And really change conversations around deservingness to that we're all deserving. Change the conversation from dignity being attached to work to dignity being attached to one's personhood. Like I am dignified because I'm a person, first and foremost, not because of what I do, not because I work. Because half the jobs that folks have don't treat them with dignity. They can't unionize. They don't get paid time off. They get yelled at for telling people to wear masks. It's just so. I to answer your question succinctly, narrative work is so important, but I mean we have to look at the history of this country. Like the country started with like land theft and genocide of the indigenous and native peoples, and then 400 years of human trafficking and free labor. So a permanent underclass and a permanent undercaste was the underpinning of the fastest growing economy in the world. So when we talk about ending poverty, we're also talking about challenging things that are deeply rooted in our society and challenge the myth we tell each other about how we came to be. And that's not to say that America can't be a great nation. That's not to say that there aren't things to like about America, but it is to say that when you talk about ending poverty, you're talking about a legacy that extends to literally 1492, a legacy that extends to when people first came to non-native people first came to this land. And that's why I think that's why the spiritual component you all provide is so important, because we're really battling like hegemonic thoughts about deservingness, about a hierarchy of human value, and about who deserves rest, who deserves to reap the rewards of labor, and who just deserves to be a laborer. And that's it.
So thank you so much. I mean, I really could keep on talking to you all evening, all night long. And I appreciate both that history, the narrative work, and then this kind of counter to the lie that we just can't do anything, because what you're doing with guaranteed income, what you're doing with all of the initiatives you're a part of, show that just is not the case. And so, thank you for all that you're doing in the fight to end poverty, and everything that you will continue to do. And thanks so much for being with us tonight. I'm gonna bring on our next guest. But at this time, if you haven't already shared or tweeted or invited someone to tune in, I want to urge you to do so now. You can use the tags. What we're using this evening are hashtag Beloved Community Talks, and then also the hashtag End Poverty. And so I want to welcome our next guest. And as I am going to bring on her, I'm reminded of another quote from Reverend Dr. King, when he said that nothing is so much needed as a secure family life for people seeking to rise out of poverty and backwardness. And I think a lot about the work of our next guest certainly will support many people in helping to secure their families' lives. And so I want to welcome Hope Wallensack. Hope Wallensack is the founding executive director of the Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund. Prior to her current role, she served as a senior strategist at the Economic Security Project. She also led the Old Fourth Ward Economic Security Task Force, a community-driven initiative that examines the root causes of economic insecurity in Atlanta and beyond. And so I want to welcome Hope to these beloved community talks. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to just jump right into our conversation, and obviously similarly to Michael Tubbs, you're someone who clearly understands what Dr. King articulated about the incredible value of kind of a secured family life. So I'm wondering if you can just kind of start off by sharing with all of us, all of our viewers to this evening, more about your current work with the Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund, and how you believe it advances the ability for others to secure us a better life for their families and for the community at whole.
Yeah. And Michael Tubbs is a tough act to follow. I know that he covered so many, I think, of the principles that guide our work, and certainly the work in Stockton. I think the beauty of this work has been that it's transcended many different states. And so we get to learn from one another, and we've certainly taken inspiration from Michael Tubbs. So thank you for your words. So the Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund, or the GROW Fund, has launched the In Her Hands Guaranteed Income Initiative. And we provide women in 3 communities in Georgia $850 a month for 2 years, no strings attached. And really what we know is that people are making the right choices. Our policies are failing folks. And so we launched in the Old Fourth Ward neighborhood of Atlanta. That's the heart of Atlanta. It is physically in the center of our city. It is also where Dr. King grew up, where he pastored Ebenezer Baptist Church. It's where he and Coretta are buried to this day. And we really feel here in particular, they're looking, and that their words really guide us, that this place can not just be a place that's about our past, but also guide us into a more just and moral future. And so King and Coretta are watching in many ways. Who will we choose to be? What values will we choose to embrace? In this very neighborhood, just blocks from King's historic childhood home and the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, is the largest concentration of Section 8 housing in the Southeast U.S. And this is juxtaposed to $1 million newly constructed renovations happening in this very same neighborhood. This place that was once the heart of sort of Black middle class and working class in Atlanta is really being like brick by brick being taken away. And so we're launching this program specifically in this neighborhood to talk about how we bridge these conversations of not only economic justice, but racial justice, and how these things are inherently linked together. They thrive off of one another and are really, really codependent on one another to exist. And so our program will be supporting women in this neighborhood, and then 2 additional communities across Georgia, for a total of 3 communities. And we know that this is one piece of the puzzle to ensure that people have access to a decent, dignified life. So I'm very excited about this work and how it builds on the work in Stockton, the work happening in many different cities across the country, Magnolia Mothers Trust in Jackson, Mississippi as well, led by Aisha Nyandaro.
That's awesome. It's such important work, and I'm hoping we can kind of dig more into the powerful work that's happening, and you were just mentioning the important kind of lens of race and racism, and we know we're very aware how race and racism is used as a tool to divide communities, and maybe folks have questioned or challenged the initiative that you have of In Her Hands, which is specifically about lifting up Black women. And so I would love to ask you kind of a question or a series of questions about kind of countering for folks that might say that, well, poverty knows no race. Why is it so important for you, and why is it just so important to launch initiatives that are prioritizing the support of Black women in Atlanta? And how do you see that this initiative, actually shifting the conditions, actually addressing the problems that so many women and their communities are facing?
Yeah, there's two parts to this. One is what we look at the data, and then one is sort of like morally who we will choose to be. I think we can start with the data if that's convincing to folks, but I think many of these data points have been repeated over and over. So I'm conscious I am not repeating new data points, and either these compel you sort of to action, or I'm not really quite sure. So Black women make 63 cents on the dollar compared to their white male counterparts. It means that we are working for free months into the year. Equal pay day for us is not until August this year. It means that we are working months of the year for free, virtually. That impact is not just felt by us as individuals, it is felt by our kids. It has ripple effects across communities. We think about poverty sort of as like an individual level problem. Poverty is pervasive. Economic insecurity is felt by across communities, and it's intense within specific communities. So cash shortages, if I can't afford my basic needs, but also my neighbor can't, and my sister can't, and all of these other people in my community can't, well, now that impact has just been intensified 10, 20, 100-fold. And then we multiply it over generations and decades, and we see some of the impacts that we're seeing today. And so when we look at the data, Black women make 63 cents on the dollar. We're one of the most likely groups to be born into poverty. We're also one of the most likely groups to be stuck in poverty. And we know this is a lot about what Michael Tubbs was just saying. There's so much labor that happens in our economy that is either undercompensated or uncompensated. Women hold a disproportionate amount of this work. And then we know that, of course, Black folks' lives and labor are devalued within our economy and society. And so when we talk about our economy and economic outcomes, what we're really talking about is people's lives and experiences, and how people are experiencing a society and their ability to thrive and to provide for themselves in the quality and duration of their life, the quality and duration of people's lives. And so I think sometimes we look at these measures and these numbers get really stale, but for us, that's people's ability to afford shoes for their kids, 3 meals a day for their kids, to be able to self-determine for themselves and their community. And so really we're starting with Black women because we know that Black women are facing some of the harshest impacts of economic insecurity or poverty that is literally removing our ability to live. It impacts like literally our material conditions and the duration and quality of our lives. And so given the intersection of both racism and sexism and the way that those manifest in our economy, Black women are right in the middle. And this is not by accident. It is not unintentional. It is intentionally our lives and our labor are devalued. And so we want to uproot that system. We're starting with Black women. If we're not intentional about debunking the status quo, we're often perpetuating it. And so our intention is that we start with some of those folks who are experiencing the harshest impacts, whose life and labor is often the most devalued. And we're starting with that group as we're at this critical stage where we're building out what a guaranteed income can look like, when we're building out what anti-poverty policies really look like. It's only fitting that we start with Black women. And so I think there's both the data that should compel us, but also I think there is this humanity, morality aspect that should really compel us that it is fitting to start with Black women. I'm inspired by the Combahee River Collective in their words, to summarize standpoint theory, those on the margins have the widest view of the world. And so it's not just starting with Black women in the sense of giving to them, but it's actually like Black women have incredible like assets, insights, and value to contribute to this conversation, and have been for a long time. We'll get into the history, but I'll be brief, and have been for a long time to this conversation. And so it's only fitting that we start with them. That is not to say that the policy may end there, but it's an important starting place for this conversation.
No, that's really so helpful and really beautiful. In the work that I do in the Poor People's Campaign, we have this saying that when you lift from the bottom, everybody rises, right? And so I would actually love to kind of dig a little deeper into the kind of policy implications that you were just talking about. It's how actually does the larger community get lifted up, improve the lives when you start from those margins, when you start with Black women, because it is so true. And I so can you tell us a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah. And this is borrowing a lot. I have to give credit where it's due, from the Black Women Best framework, which is a growing policy framework that sort of embraces that Combahee River collective idea, like those on the margins have the widest view of the world. And in our economy, which again is just a collection of people, in sort of their life experiences, Black women are often facing some of the harshest outcomes. And this is also despite, I should mention this, Black women have the highest labor force participation rates. So they're they're the most likely group of women across racial groups to be working. So a lot of these stereotypes that we have about like folks not working, and that's why they're not able to afford basic things, is just it's completely false altogether. And so when we say, I think you said it perfectly, lifting from the bottom, everyone rises. So often our policies are focused on, I mean, this is white supremacy. It can be often unintentionally focused on prioritizing specific communities. And I think unstated, it can often be prioritizing, dominant communities, in this case, in terms of racial groups, white communities. And so unless we are intentionally centering other experiences, other voices, our policies will by nature, and this is sort of the systemic nature of racism, our policies by nature will marginalize those groups, unless we are intentional about it doing the opposite. This is sort of what Angela Davis calls like grasping at the root. Like we have to get to the root of this, and we can only get to the root by being really intentional about the groups that we focus on. And so I think you said it very well. When we're lifting those who are at the bottom and who are experiencing the harshest impacts of a system, we're actually helping that system work better for everyone. We're helping to ensure that all different groups of people, different groups of women, different racial groups, that we could go down the list, are experiencing a more just and equitable economy where they can thrive. And when we're sort of uprooting the tropes, racial, gender, and beyond tropes that really drive our policies, then we can all start experiencing a decent, dignified life that we deserve.
No, that's I really deeply appreciate all of that, and it makes me think some of of course, if you're talking about that labor participation rate being so high, and therefore so many of the low wage jobs of our society are there with Black women and women of color, doing them, then of course, advocating for a living wage or advocating for a guaranteed income, lifts everybody up. I mean, it starts with those that need it the most, who are hurt first and worst. But that raising a living, minimum wage to a living wage, helps, tens of millions of workers, so many of them. And so I really appreciate, all of the work that you're doing. I want to hear a little bit from you now about just like, what can people do, right? Like, we're talking about big things, lofty ideas like eradicating poverty, having families live lives of dignity. I mean, especially if people don't have a lot of resources to donate to good causes or whatever. What can people do to get involved and to make a difference?
Yeah, I think folks can advocate. I think we're at this unprecedented moment where the majority of Americans have received some type of guaranteed income or direct cash assistance, let's say via stimulus checks or the child tax credit that Michael Tubbs was just talking about. And so, like, now is the time. Now is the time to, I think, more so than ever, like, I think what we're seeing is guaranteed income and really policies that are not piecemeal, as King called them, we're really getting to the heart of the issue. And I think what we're seeing is this decoupling of certain types of work and the right to live a decent, dignified life and deservingness. And we're seeing that decoupling happen. And I would say folks should lean into this, like lean into these conversations with people in your network, in your spheres. Like, I think that it starts really with us talking to each other and showing each other, like, this is what love looks like. It does mean caring for my neighbor. Justice is what love looks like in public, right? So like, this is how we show love for one another, and that you've experienced it, we've experienced it too. Stimulus checks, child tax credit, right? We all have experienced, or many of us have experienced those moments where, you know, it just simply does not add up. And for some people and for some communities, we're stretching it. This is not just a couple months like a pandemic. It's stretched over years, decades, lifetimes, generations. And so if we have this love for one another, I think that's what we put it into action. And so I would say that this is a really key moment where this guaranteed income and sort of direct cash assistance and this ability to really pull at poverty right at the root causes is right in front of us, and we can take the action steps to sort of push it forward. You can support policies, support support folks who support policies that really get to the root causes of economic insecurity and poverty. And I think demystifying it within our circles, sharing that data, sharing these experiences, I think can always help folks. And of course, join great organizations like the Poor People's Campaign and the King Center, of course. So
awesome. Well, Hope, thank you so much for, I think the hope that the work you're doing is bringing to Atlanta, bringing to the nation and the world. And thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
And this is just such powerful work. I'm sure you all are as inspired as I am. And it's so very needed if we're going to actually eliminate poverty, which, is completely possible. So I don't want to lose any time. I want to invite our final guest this evening. I want to welcome Ashley Bell. Mr. Ashley Bell is a former banking and corporate partner at the world's largest law firm. He's a former White House policy advisor for entrepreneurship and innovation. He co-founded and served as the general counsel of the National Black Bank Foundation and the Black Bank Fund, which has delivered over $500 million worth of deal flow to Black banks across the country. And so welcome. It's so great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And, I can just say that I was so inspired by the last group with Hope that I donated myself. So I hope that others were equally as inspired. You can find the Grow Fund on her social media account, and just happy to be a part of that. Just a phenomenal opportunity. I hope a lot more people take advantage of that.
What a fantastic plug. Thank you so much for that. And so as I was just talking with Hope in this last segment about the ways that race and racism impact so many of our communities, like we obviously understand that past and current challenges for Black people and financial institutions in America. So I'm wondering what role, that inequality, those challenges have played in the founding of the National Black Bank Foundation, and how does the work of your foundation seek to actually end poverty?
We have to look at the root of this, and I think I appreciate Brother Tubbs and Hope for really not being afraid to look at the roots of this stuff. And I think when it comes to banking in particular, it goes back to before slavery. It goes back to promises made, promises not kept. It goes back to 40 acres and a mule that we never saw. And specifically, it goes back to the creation of the very first Black bank, which was the Freedmen's Bureau. The American government understood at the conclusion of slavery that in order to take a people from being capital to capitalist, they had to understand how money works and how money moves in our economy. Going from being on someone's balance sheet to having your own balance sheet took education, and it took a introduction. And this introduction that was the Freedmen's Bureau was one that damaged our people for a very long time. It was the Freedmen's Bureau that was created for banks for freed slaves. What was so iconic about the Freedmen's Bureau, you had over 60% of former slaves putting money in these bureaus. They were everywhere across the South. Pennies were going into these bureaus, people who didn't have much because they wanted to be a part of this great capitalist experiment that America had been working on, that they knew worked for some people and figured it should work for them now that they're free. Well, the bottom line was that this bank and those pennies from those former slaves was spent on speculation out west. And so to cover it up, they brought in the great abolitionist, Frederick Douglass, who became the very first Black bank president. And when Frederick Douglass became the first Black bank president, he realized when he put 10,000 of his own dollars in, that the Freedmen's Bureau, created by our government to usher us from capital to capitalism, was a fraud. And he went to Congress and said, we have to shut this down. All of the money is being spent on speculation out west. And with the stroke of a pen, Congress ended the Freedmen's Bureau, and not one former slave got a penny back. W.E.B. Du Bois came and said this, and I think it rings true today through decades and decades. W.E.B. Du Bois said, it would have been better off for us to remain slaves for another decade than to have the Freedmen's Bureau closed. Think about that. He said it would have been better off for us to be slaves another 10 years rather than the psychological effect of entering your first part of being an American citizen and have the government take all your money and not give it back to you and expect you to trust financial institutions. And here we are, 2022, we're a little over 1% of the total wealth of this country. The day the Freedmen's Bureau is closed, we were a little under 1% of America's total wealth. All this time, we haven't grown our posture and our position. So when we talk about the rise of Black banks, the night Dr. King was assassinated, we had over 120 Black banks in this country. As I speak to you, we have 18. And why is this important? It's important because economies and jobs are created when you circulate the money, when you can have engines where your dollar can leave one hand and go to your barber and then go to the plumber, and it all stays in one community. It creates jobs for those people. Well, when you don't own your bank or control your bank, that means the moment you get your paycheck, you're outsourcing it to someone else's community to build someone else's dreams and opportunity. So Black banks are critical, because if we don't have Black banks, then the little wealth we do have is being leveraged by other people to create other opportunities. And I'll say like this, we can kind of frame this. When you look at communities that are deserts, and we talk about them all the time, healthcare deserts, food deserts, banking deserts, all these things you can follow from the way our economy is set up. Credit is like water. Where it flows, things grow. Where it does not flow, things do not grow. So when you deny a community access to credit, you deny its opportunity to grow, to start businesses, to support families, to support home ownership. All these things flow from the river of credit. And when we know that every statistic shows us that African Americans are denied access to this water, to this much needed ability to grow time and time again, when every time we look on the news, there's some big bank with some big story saying how they didn't want that water to flow to people that were Black and brown in our country. And I think that is the root of what the National Black Bank Foundation was created to do. This is why we're honored to have Dr. Bernice King as one of our founders. And since that time, we've been trying to lean in to industries that make money off of Black bodies and Black talent, like sports and entertainment, and tell them, as Dr. King said in his final speech in Memphis, it's time to bring that money home. It's time to create a banking in movement. So you can't just take our money out of our community and build other people's wealth. It's time to bring that money home. And that's what the Black Bank Foundation has been doing. That's what that $500 million that we've been able to bring back home has been about.
No, that's good. That's really powerful. Thank you for all of that. So I'm thinking about a powerful quote from Reverend Dr. King, where he says that as long as there is poverty in the world, I can never be rich, even if I have $1 billion. So I'm wondering if you could kind of speak to this, like, how does this resonate with you? And especially when some of the various wealthiest in the country and world aren't burdened with the same taxes or fees or other things that overwhelm many of the poorest in this country. And how do you see the efforts that you're waging about kind of achieving greater economic justice and economic equity for all?
Right. It's incredibly expensive in America to be poor. Incredibly expensive.
It sure is.
10 million people in our country spend a total of $9 billion just to access their money that they earn. Just think about that. There's 10 million people in this country that a total spend $9 billion just to gain access to paychecks that they earned, whether this is check cashing, high interest rates, to get access to their money. Mm-hmm. We have a system that is set up to do exactly what it's doing. Okay. It punishes poverty. Mm-hmm. It punishes poor people. We have this weird thing called a credit score that puts 3 numbers on everybody. And these 3 numbers that it puts on everybody dictates the access you have even to your own money sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so if your credit score is low, it costs you more to get access to money. And that, to me, is where we have the biggest divide, where what creates the racial wealth gap in this country. We need to create a system, and this is what we're leaning into with the National Black Bank Foundation. This is what we're leaning into with some very innovative things that are coming very soon. We need a system without credit scores. We need to abolish the entire credit score system. It has given us the racial wealth gap. It has given us a world where only 42% of Black people own a home and 73% of white people own a home. And that has been the case for 60 years. This is what it has given us. We need to create a score that sees people for who they are. We need to create something that sees the whole person and recognizes that sometimes you'll have setbacks. Recognizes that sometimes things in your life will happen. You may go through a divorce. You may have a bad business. You may have a healthcare crisis, but it shouldn't bankrupt you for the rest of your life. And by getting rid of credit scores and creating a new way and a new pathway to get access to that water I was talking about, we can grow new dreams. We can grow new communities. We can blossom all sorts of ideas of innovation, but we have to go to the core of this and understand that the system we have has given us what we don't deserve.
So I would love to hear from you about what you think that people that are tuning in, people that you meet, along your life, can do. I mean, to support the to the foundation, to get involved in the work of actually economic equity, to take on this racial wealth gap. Will you tell our viewers, our listeners, how you see being able to resolve this?
I'm a country boy. I'm from Gainesville, Georgia, which is a little small town. And I'll say this, there's a lot of wolves in sheep clothing walking around our community right now. And we need to recognize who we are. All right. Every time you turn on the television, you're seeing more and more companies, financial institutions marketing to Black and brown people and poor people. And just because they're marketing to you doesn't mean they're for you. I believe that as much as we focus on policy, we must also focus on products. What's for the people must be for the people, not just marketed to the people. And I'll give you an example. When you look at fintechs, these companies that are on your television screen with happy Black and brown people dancing and having a good time, saying, give us your money, put your money in our bank and all this stuff, recognize what's behind that marketing. Just because I have a Black or brown face on the front of it and you now start depositing your check on this app that's on your phone, 10 times out of 10, your money is now being sucked out of Atlanta, sucked out of Stockton, sucked out of out of Philadelphia and Chicago, and put in rich, affluent, homogeneous communities that are nowhere near you, building someone else's dreams. This is accelerating the racial wealth gap in our country because we're being marketed to, and the precious resources we have are being taken from us and given to other folks. Now, I know everybody pays everybody with Cash App, but did you ever think, when you go through Cash App, where is that bank? Where is this money actually going? To us, I'd send it to you, you send it to me, we just had an easy transaction. But the reality is, in a gig economy, where our brothers and sisters are trying to make money the best they can, they are marketed to by these companies, and these companies hold your money in a far off place, helping far off folks that don't need it, but they're building their dreams off of our economy. So I'm not about just complaining about this. What I'm telling you is there's a revolution coming. There's something coming, and that revolution will be new products and services that will truly be for the people. But it begins with educating the people to look behind the marketing, to see these wolves that are walking through our community and taking our precious water we do have and reverting it to other places that have enough. You can't really fight this issue of poverty unless we understand that every generation has brand new challenges that are entrapping people who are poor. And we're too late to realize what's happening. And then we write books about what happened. We're right in the middle of it. In a post-George Floyd world, you see millions of dollars being put out every day saying what people are going to do for us. But now it's accountability season. It's time to ask the question, where's the money going? These products and services that you're marketing to us, are they for us? And if they are, prove it. We have to hold everyone accountable, every policymaker and every product developer.
I appreciate that. It makes me think actually so much of some of the biggest corporations in the world who do market, as you were just saying, to Black and brown communities who make much of their money off of the buying of Black and brown communities. I'm thinking about, some of the lowest paying but largest corporations in the world, McDonald's and some of these others who are taking people's money, but still marketing to them. And so, I think that one of the things that makes me want, I want to give you some last words, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit too. You talked about both the products and the policies, and so just to say a little more about again how we can actually resolve some of these issues, because I tell that you're a deeply hopeful person, and so what is to be done? What can we do? Where do we go from here?
I think it starts with all of us banking our values. Bank your values. Don't put your money, or don't let your friends put their money anywhere that does not reflect your values. That money is not being used for the benefit of our community, then I guarantee you it's being used against us. And we've seen it time and time again. So it starts with educating yourself. Let's start from there. It starts with, if you're going to use a Black dry cleaner, you're going to use a Black caterer, you also need to be thinking about the institutions that hold your money. So even if you're not using a Black bank, maybe you don't have one near you. Maybe you're watching this right now and you're saying, actually, I just don't have one close by. I understand that. But you also have to voice your values to where you do bank. They have to know what matters to you. And it's more than just marketing. And I think every one of the major corporations in this country in the last 2 years have made some announcement about what they intended to do to benefit the least of these. And I think that right now, in the middle of this accountability season, it takes every one of us to look at the places we lay our head, where we spend our time and our treasure and our talent, and do an accountability check to make sure that we're banking our values, we're living our values, we're spending with our values. If we do that collectively, then we have a moment in the sun right now to where we can turn history. We can really divert what's coming. Because what's coming, unfortunately, is a world where marketing and words matter more than substance, where outreach matters more than outcomes, where ideology means more than ideas. And I think we can bring it back to a place where we can say our lives matter, our values matter, and we're going to force companies to reflect those values, or you won't get our business. This is the new sit-in.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank everybody who has tuned in this evening. I want to encourage you all to take action. We had some powerful suggestions from these phenomenal guests this evening. I invite you again to join the Poor People's Campaign. And I want to close with just one of my favorite quotes from Reverend Dr. King. He said, "The curse of poverty has no justification in our age. The time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty." We are well beyond that time, and we can indeed eradicate poverty. Hopefully, everyone here will choose to do so and join each of us in the fight for a guaranteed income and to eradicate all poverty. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the next time we can be together.